Hi, Eamon here from No One Likes Us Talking, where we have another special show for you where we welcome another Millwall celebrity to tell us about his involvement with our club. He has been an iconic figure over the years, and I, Eamon, had the pleasure of working with him as part of the panel of the Lions Live show, where his knowledge of Millwall was found to be outstanding. When I say iconic, I always see him from afar. Mind you, I'm 6'3", and I suppose it's easy for me. But he has a wonderful head of hair that he possesses, and I welcome the man himself. Hello, Jeff Burnige.
Good morning, Eamon. Thank you for that introduction. I don't quite know how to take it, but did you have your tongue placed firmly in your cheek? I think you did.
Maybe, just maybe. No, not at all. It's great to talk to you. Go. Yeah, let's talk the Lions. How did you get involved with the club?
It is known, I think, that my father, who was a second-generation Millwall fan, brought up in Bermondsey, right in the bit right by London Bridge Station, Guy's Hospital up there, Tooley Street. He'd been a fan from boyhood, and he was second-generation Millwall fan, and obviously one of the things that happens is that, like father, like son. So that's how I came to support the Lions. Once the family had almost all moved out of the area, as what happened after the Second World War, the only real connection he had with the area after a long while was that we still went to Millwall, and so it became a very, very important part of his life, and after that of mine. How did I get involved with the club on a more formal basis? Strangely, it was me that got my father onto the board of directors indirectly. One of the things we did together was to go to the boxing clubs in the West End, whether they be held at the Hilton or the Grosvenor House or the Café Royal. Yeah. So the boxing dinners, tuxedo meal, some boxing, and there were always celebrities there, and they always invited people, and on one occasion there were some Millwall players there with a great guy called Harry Grove, who worked for the club for many years, and I went over and introduced myself as probably, what was I, about 17, as you probably would. Maybe I was a bit older. And he said, I'll come over and meet your dad. And he came over. One thing led to another. He was invited to come to the club, to go to the director's box. And sooner or later, he was asked to become a member of the board and then eventually chairman. He passed away in 1983. And 3 years later, I had the opportunity with Reg Burr to buy the club. And that's what I did, and that's how I came to be a director and later, briefly, chairman.
Well, that was a very precise, or concise, should I say, explanation of things. Your father was extremely famous for his passionate views of Millwall fans, I know, and yours continued through the years. I think you held the position of chairman for probably one of the shortest periods of time. Can you just give us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd been on the board for 20 years nearly, and so I was experienced. I'd served, I'd watched my dad's chairmanship carefully. I'd watched his successor's chairmanship carefully from within. I proposed to Alan Thorne, our predecessor, how we could move on from his investment in Millwall, which is what Reg and I did with a guy called Brian Mitchell. And at the end of the day, we had some ups and downs. At one point, we went into administration. That's well remembered and well documented. Yeah. Theo came in. He decided to keep me involved on a very, very intense basis. I was very involved. It was a very interesting period. He's a great person to work for and work with and see him at work, although obviously our relationship had its ups and downs. It probably sadly finished with a down, but before it did, when he could no longer put up with being chairman, he asked me to do it, and that's how I came to be chairman. It was going to be straight away from that February, but the politics within the club involving his relationship with the then manager, Dennis Wise, it was decided that I should be chairman-elect for the rest of the season and then take the chair once the season finished. And I did that, and then as the new season approached, it became clear that the basis of the arrangement I had with Theo wasn't going to survive, and with very, very heavy heart, in my own interests, but also in the interests of the future of the club, I decided that I would have to step down from being chairman. I stayed on the board for a good while. That's another story, but that's why my period of chairmanship was quite brief.
Well, I suppose that period of time, I'm going to ask you to reflect on when Theo was there. Interestingly, we had on the last No Lose special, Richard Sadlier, who spoke about the similarities between the 2000-2001 team that were promoted as champions from the third tier and the 2001-02 team who lost in the playoff semis, and how that compared to the last 2 years under Neil Harris. Well, you'll remember that period quite clearly, I would imagine, and be able to compare and contrast what's been going on between then and now.
Obviously, the mind, the memory can play tricks. Obviously, I recall the last 2 years much clearer than I recall those ones of between 50 and 20 years ago. Sounds incredible when you say it, doesn't it?
Unbelievable.
That was a very good team. That one that Richard was involved in. My memories of it are very clear. Theo had come in 1997. Initially, he did things in the way that he thought it should be done, but after a short while, we changed tack to trying to produce a team from within, from our own youth development programme, which, as it happened, was in a very strong state at the time. One of the important people in that was Bob Pearson, who was our chief scout and also in charge of the youth development program. In those days, there wasn't the money to throw around and have lots of employees. We all did lots of things, and so Bob embraced both of those roles. We just he had constructed, for about the second or third time in his career, an outstanding cadre of young players that we produced ourselves, and it was that team that played at Wembley for the first time in peacetime as a Millwall team.
Yeah.
What was that? Was that 1999, I believe? And that team went on to very nearly get us into the top division. And if it had have done, it would have been able to hold its own. And I think the big similarities between the two are that there was nobody around the playing squad who wasn't totally committed and enamoured of the idea of playing for Millwall and trying to win success not only for themselves but also for the club. And that came from creating a particular atmosphere. People forget about that 1999 Wembley appearance, which we lost, but there were a large number of players in that team that we'd produced ourselves and who had very little experience. And there were some experienced players still at the club who didn't play as big a part in that final as they would under possibly other regimes, because Ryan Alamaka, who were the management team at the time, wanted to give the opportunity to young players because they felt that a Wembley, the semi-final and the final would give them a lot of experience very quickly. And that's why they did it. And that's why, off the top of my head, I can remember Paul Ifill, Richard Sadlier, Neil Harris, Ronnie Bull, Joe Dolan, Tim Cahill, Stephen Reed, all playing a part in that. And that's a lot of players to produce yourself. There were one or two others probably under, but they're the ones that come most rapidly to mind. And what a great team that would have been if it had been able to mature completely.
Yeah, incredible group of players. Richard Sadlier said he really found out what it meant to be a Millwall player.
Well, I'll give you one comparison, Eamon, which jumps to my mind, right? The managers, Rhino and Macca, they had played for Millwall, and they were Millwall people, and they knew how to create a team that would be a Millwall team and would be able to create a rapport between the players and the crowd. What's happened the last 2 years? The manager's been a player that played for Millwall and instinctively knew how to create a Millwall team that would have a good relationship with the crowd. That's the obvious similarity. I hope the club learns that lesson, and 20 years from now, if we have to start from scratch again, we'll do the same thing.
Well, that'll be the case. We'll have that conversation in 20 years' time if it doesn't quite work out that way. But
yes, please.
Hopefully it all does, and we see some great glory days ahead. You mentioned Tim Cahill there in the group of players.
Yeah.
How did he join us? You must be quite aware of Tim's journey with us.
It's an interesting example of how you get things right on recruitment. I mean, there are many ways to skin that cat, and it looks as though our recruitment at the moment is back where it needs to be, which is probably the most important and effective part of the club. But Tim's was an interesting example. It won't be the only way it ever happened, but I can tell you about it. Tim was an underrated player in Australia because he was always very small. He never represented his country at any level, any age group. He wasn't on their radar, but someone out there believed in him. And of course, at the age they were talking about, when he was 15, 16, boys do shoot up sometimes, and they do develop. And some players, the best player they're ever going to be is when they're 15. Other players at 15, 16 are only just beginning to reveal to themselves and to others just what capability they have. And he was a late developer. He, through a contact, got a trial with Nottingham Forest. Towards the end of a season, he went over there. They put him in a hotel, and as I understand it, he hardly spoke to anybody for 3 days. But he was in a hotel, he was fed, but they fell down on the job for whatever reason, and he rang home, and contact was made with Alan Batsford, who was working for us at the time, the late Alan Batsford, who was working with Bob Pearson at the time. And Alan said, "This boy's been highly recommended by someone I trust. He's not happy where he is. Can we bring him down and have a look at him?" So we did. And I can't remember the exact circumstances of what happened when he came down, whether it was a game session or an informal game amongst ourselves. Bob Pearson was there and made a decision on the day. No, we're signing him. Simple as that. And you have to have somebody in position at the club who is as decisive as that, and who has got the authority to make those kind of decisions, or at least to heavily recommend them to the person that can make those decisions. So it was decided we would want him. We were, if I remember, I might have a slight problem, and if I have someone out there will correct me, I think it was the peer administration.
Right.
And I had to find out where we could put Tim up for free for the summer until we emerged from it. And he had relations living in Grays in Essex, and he went over there for the off-season, and we came out of administration, and the day that the players could report back, I went over and fetched him, brought him back, and we did the paperwork. We got his national insurance, we got his bank account opened, and he joined the club. And that was an example of when opportunity strikes, you have to take it. And I can give you many examples under other regimes that I was a spectator rather than a real participant, where similar opportunities were there and we just didn't take them. And there are some very famous players of the most recent era that came within a hair's breadth of joining Millwall and didn't. Tim did join Millwall, and the rest everyone knows.
Yeah. Well, that must have been quite emotional when he came back.
It was, but, you know, the important thing is to see how emotional it was for Tim. It meant that his period at Millwall, not crowned with total success, but finishing with a cup final appearance, which I suppose is a high point.
Yeah.
It shows you that it never left him, and that's unusual for a player to have done what he's gone on in the game and done, been probably the most famous player in Australia's history, a highest achiever in their soccer history, to have done what he did at Everton and then played at the top level in the United States of America and China. You know, for him to have that deep emotional connection with the club, it speaks great volumes for what was done in that period when he was at the club. Emotional for me, Eamon, I can barely stand to talk about it. Yes, I'm a man that cries with emotion.
Yeah.
I've cried many times over Millwall, and I cried when he came back.
But as they say, a forest fell and the lions roared, and Tim Cahill became a Millwall player. The rest is history. Your latest project involves two other, fantastic players that were with us, Trevor Lee and Phil Walker. What are you up to with those guys?
Well, that predates by a long way the arrival of Tim, obviously. Excuse me. I've always believed that one of the things that was holding Millwall back from being the top club in the country, which remains my ambition, laugh if you like, was that the club was originally founded in an enclave of London on the Isle of Dogs, where it was difficult to increase the number of spectators, the number of natural supporters. And then we were in that corner of southeast London, economically fairly deprived, dependent on the Surrey docks, largely. And I've always believed that we needed to be very conscious of building our supporter base. Not always a popular thing to do with your existing supporters, because they don't want it to change, and they want it to be theirs. But I wanted to expand the supporter base, and the two obvious areas that I always wanted to expand, and I didn't really have a success in my time on the board to the degree I would like to have done. I wanted to expand the club's appeal to females, which was half the population. And back in those days, it didn't have much appeal to females. And I wanted to make sure that we began to reflect the population around the club's area, which was becoming more diverse ethnically. And I wanted to see Millwall in the vanguard of both broadening football's appeal to females and to people from ethnic minorities, whether they be South American, Afro-Caribbean, whatever it might have been. Yeah. And the arrival of Trevor and Phil was a big moment in my time at Millwall. It was during my dad's chairmanship, and we had a black player in the team before, a guy called Frank Peterson.
Oh, Frank.
Who's a good example of how there are many ways to fail. The reason that, you know, there are many brilliant young players, but only a percentage can ever succeed. There's many ways to fail, and sadly Frank failed. He's a very talented boy and a centre forward, should have gone on and been a great player. But a few years after that, Gordon Jago had a similar opinion to me on this matter, and the club got relegated, and the team was not strong, and so there was room in the team for some new blood. And Gordon had recommended to him I think it was by a guy called Billy Miller, who was the manager of Leatherhead at the time when, I think it was at the time when Chris Kelly joined us. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I remember Chris
The
Kelly.
Leatherhead Lip.
Yeah.
Right. So Phil and Trevor, who are both still playing Sunday football in South London, but also had begun playing for Epsom and Newell, which was then a half-decent amateur club.
Yeah.
It's fallen a bit since then, and they came in, and not only did they pass their trial, but Gordon felt that he could put them straight in the team, and that was mind-blowing at the time, because there were not many players, there were not many black players in football in 1975, but it was clearly bubbling under, because a lot of the young lads were playing, and it was only a matter of time, and I wanted Millwall to be in the vanguard of it. Also, our name had been blackened in many ways, and I just thought it would be brilliant if Millwall were able, like we love to do, to be contrary. What people expect of Millwall, we love to do the opposite.
Yeah.
And this was before the Cyril Regis, Brendan Batson, Laurie Cunningham period at West Brom, which everyone looks back on now.
Yeah.
Millwall signed these two young lads. They got no experience. We put them straight in the team, and it was to their great credit that they settled quickly, and if there were any minds that were closed against players like them being in the team, they opened them, and I think they are two towering figures in Millwall's history. That's what I think, and I'm very proud that I was around to see them come into the team.
They were famous and still are, and are always welcomed when they appear at the Den.
Make no mistake, Eamon, Phil was one of the best players that played for Millwall in my time. He was a really gifted central midfield player. He could do it all.
Yeah.
He could do it all, and he did show on occasions how good he was. But memory fades, and I wish there were videos of those days. But there was one game away at Aston Villa where, if ever the phrase, much used phrase, he ran the game.
Yeah.
Phil ran the game at Aston Villa. I don't remember much about it, but I remember thinking, my God, I have just seen a performance that should live in the memory. What a shame it's not video of it. He was a great player. He got injured quite soon after joining the club, and Trevor, who had not made quite the initial impression, because he was a 6'1" guy that our fans thought, well, he should be a centre forward. He was playing wide. They couldn't get their heads around that. But when Phil was out of the team injured, Trevor had to step forward, and while Phil was injured, it was when Trevor made his mark. And by the time Phil came back, they were both adored by our fans. And Trevor was an unconventional player, but did some great things that people remember to this day. And as I said, towering figures in Millwall's history, in my opinion.
Is it right that we might see something about that in the media in the not too distant future?
Yeah, I mean, I get involved in some local charities. I've long been deputy chairman of a charity called Peckham Settlement, and they got involved with a young guy called Quince, and he's making a film about that subject. How it was to be a Millwall fan in those days. It will touch on some delicate areas, I'm sure, but it will touch on them honestly. He's a black filmmaker.
Yeah.
It will be honest. It needs to be. But Phil and Trevor have got that love of the club that I described Tim having earlier.
Yeah.
And it must mean that their period at the club was life enhancing for them. They both absolutely love coming back, and amazed at the reception that they get and the memory of a long time ago that our fans have. So that's another example. This film will be very interesting. They've both been interviewed at length. There'll be brutally honest about their experiences at the time. I hope the film reflects how much of a role they played in changing attitudes, because they did need to change, let's be fair. And
tremendous difference.
when that comes out, I'll even be interviewed on that film as well. Hope that doesn't put people off too much.
No, we'll see that iconic crop of hair again. That'll be good. That brings. I mean, as you say, you've always been interested in making things and doing things that support diversity and improve the development of everyone and anyone around in the community. And one area that you do get involved in big time is with the Millwall Lionesses as well.
Well, I mentioned females, didn't I, earlier?
You did.
I mentioned females, and yeah. I mean, it's all part of that. But when you deal in trying to broaden the support for the club, it's vital to take your existing fans with you. It's no good imposing something on them. You have to take your base with you, and I hope I've never failed to do that. But our supporters never fail to amaze me with how brilliant they are. My former colleague Reg, the late Reg Bird, did describe them as the most misunderstood group of people that he's ever come across. Yeah. Which I think is true. And I'm not currently involved with them other than as a supporter. I love to go and watch them play. Too few of our fans do. There may be more reason than one for that, but soon after I joined the board in '86, I became president. They asked me to become president, and later chairman. Sounds like a demotion, but chairman's much more hands-on. Yeah. I'm happy to say that while I was chair of the Lionesses, we were undoubtedly one of the two most illustrious and successful clubs in the country, ourselves and Doncaster Bells. Yeah. We won the FA Cup twice while I was chairman. The first time against Doncaster Bells, after that cup final, and I'm struggling, I think it was 1991, the first Women's National League was formed. This was before the FA took women's football seriously, and took it over in the mid-90s. But the first ever National League game was they chose Millwall and Doncaster, who'd just been the two finalists, to play the inaugural game in the Women's National League. Very proud of that. We won it again later with a team that was very different to the 91 team in that it was the product of a youth development programme which Millwall Lionesses very much pioneered. I don't think anybody else in the country was running girls' football in the way that Millwall was in those days, in the late 80s and 90s. And to see a team that we basically produced ourselves win the FA Cup and I think the League Cup in the same season later in the 90s, that was a great pleasure. I'm not involved now, but you saw what people really thought of the Lionesses when they had that bad news earlier in the season that there'd been some financial problems and that they needed money urgently to be sure they could stay alive. Yes. They opened one of these Just Giving sites, and within 2 days they got £17,000 from all kinds of sources. It shows that deep down, whatever the lack of support at matches might indicate, that people did not want to see the Lionesses go down or be reduced in importance. It is, in my opinion, a very important part of the club. Yeah. It doesn't make money. It probably costs money. But I just think it's crucial that Millwall remains associated with as high a level as possible of women's football. And at this moment, we've just finished the season as we speak, and we came third in the Women's Super League 2, which means we were ranked 13 in the country, which is higher than any Millwall men's team's ever been, except for that 1988-9 season when we finished 10th in the top flight. So The Lionesses have been brilliant for Millwall. They really have. And there's a great history. I could tell a million stories about the Lionesses, and I dearly wish and hope that they have another brilliant season next season. You know, they went unbeaten for a calendar year during this season. That's and that run only came to an end after the financial problems were announced. Yeah. And our manager, Lee Birch, won the Women's Super League 2 Manager of the Year award, which showed that his colleagues realised that he'd achieved that in some quite difficult circumstances. Great award for Lee and for the Lionesses.
Yeah.
I wish them well.
Yeah, challenging times for sure. Let's hope they can get everything ironed out and are ready to roll again for next season. But certainly
I think the Lionesses are important for English women's football. I mean, we've got England underage captains by the score. That's an exaggeration. We produced some brilliant players, and the Chelsea team of recent times that won the double this season, they've got key players in their team that were Millwall juniors. Yeah. That came through our development system. I'm talking about the great Katie Chapman, Claire Rafferty, and Julie Flaherty, all of which were key players in Chelsea's double-winning team, all of which were produced by a Millwall youth development programme that barely existed elsewhere at the time. I'm very proud of that.
Absolutely fantastic.
Can we talk about Neil Harris?
You can talk about Neil Harris, that'd be good. Before I get the last bit that I want to get from you, talk aboutIl Harris.
Well, you do that then, Eamon. Trust me to try and do your job as well as mine. What else do you want to talk about?
I've always found you to be most entertaining, particularly when working with you. You've taken the pressure off me thinking many times. I was just going to, before you talk about Neil Harris then, I was just going to say challenging times for the club itself actually coming up. We've just read that the new mayor has decided that he wants to get the club, renewal and Lewisham together to sort out a way forward over the proposed Bermondsey development. Could you give us briefly your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can. Actions speak louder than words, Eamon. Let's see what happens. These are the right words. This is something that should have happened years ago. I have to say that in my personal opinion, the club, going back many years before the present regime, totally mishandled the opportunity for regenerating the area around the ground. Some of what's happened to us recently stems from our own mistakes years ago. Maybe we'll talk about that another time, but we are where we are. Let's move forward from today. It will not be easy to bring Renewal and Millwall Football Club together in a way that they can both work on the project. It's going to be very, very difficult to do that because if the political will is there, it can happen. What I would say is that where the common ground is, and that's what you have to start, the area is ripe for regeneration. You know, it's a down at heel area. Location is brilliant. It's close to the centre of London. The rail infrastructure is improving and can improve even further.
Absolutely.
It would be good for the club if there is a lot more housing locally, producing a lot more potential support. It will be good for the country and for the housing crisis if a large number of dwellings can be created in that area. That's the political imperative. There must be regeneration. But in my opinion, and many other opinion, I think it makes sense. That regeneration must involve the football club.
Yes.
I hope and pray that that will now be the solution which is ushered in.
Certainly. I think what you've reflected on there is certainly the views of many. So the end word on that is really, let's be hopeful. So, Neil Harris, give me the words on Neil Harris.
Well, I'm proud to say I was quite involved in signing Neil as a player. Again, it was one of the later triumphs of Bob Pearson. It's only because of Bob Pearson that Neil Harris came to the club at all. I have seen some great managers at Millwall. Steve Gray, for those that go back that far, in the 60s, 2 promotions running. Brought the club from a low ebb to the division we're currently in, the second tier.
Yeah.
Benny Fenton, very close to getting Millwall into the first division for the first time in their history. Gordon Jago, if we hadn't had the tragic era of the Panorama programme, Gordon may well have gone on to become a great manager at Millwall. John Docherty, who did get Millwall into the first division. There have been some great managers. I personally thought Rhino and Macca had started a process which we talked about earlier, which Mark McGee and Ray Harford finished off. Kenny Jackett, who I would love to see manage in the Premier League. I think he's capable of doing it. But the greatest of them all is Neil Harris.
Yeah.
And that's quite an array of managers to parade and say that the best is Neil. I do believe that. I do believe it. I think that the pyramid of football has got a lot steeper now. It is much more difficult than it was in any previous era to make progress up the football pyramid.
Yeah.
The Premier League, even the bottom end of it, is miles away from where we are. And that wasn't the case when John Dock took us there. No. We went up there and we scared a lot of people. That would be very difficult to do today for a club of Millwall size. Neil has created what, in my perception, is the best camaraderie between the players, and most importantly between the players and the crowd, ever. I think it's topped any of those previous regimes, and it's been a superb effort by him. I think the team's done unbelievably well. Who, if they are being honest, thought we would ever figure in an end-of-season race for the playoff positions? We got into the playoff positions towards the end of the season. We always faced the really tricky last 4 games. We got 6 points out of those 4 games. Let's recall that. And it just wasn't quite enough to get in the playoffs. What a superb effort, because I don't think even our die-hard fans thought we'd do much better and survive nicely.
No.
I think we all would have taken, a fairly safe survival. Neil wasn't happy with that. Neil's ambitions were greater than that. The players who got around him had higher ambitions than that, and that rapport with the fans. Who can ever forget if they were lucky enough to be at Leeds this past season?
Yeah.
We all knew that was a turning point. Everybody knew it. Everybody went home knowing that was a turning point. Manager, players, supporters, we all knew it, and the second half of the season was just gobsmacking to watch, wasn't it?
It was absolutely incredible. He certainly brought the team through. He gave them that camaraderie that we haven't seen before, and certainly the poll that we held with No One Likes Us Talking clearly showed that most people thought we would be fighting for survival, and a very few thought that we would be anywhere near where we finished off.
Did anybody think we'd finish 8th? Did anybody finish that? That?
Yeah.
Well, I congratulate them. Even I didn't, and I must be one of the greatest optimists around, but I was hoping we might finish 12th.
Yeah.
Top half was my feeling, and even that felt a little bit optimistic.
Well, it has been great talking to you, Jeff. Your involvement with the club has been phenomenal. Keep doing what you do it well. I know that's not always as easy as it was in the past, but your involvement with the club still is seen by many as something that does make a difference.
That's a huge compliment, Eamon. Thank you very much for saying that. I like it to be true. I can't wait now for the fixtures to come out on June the 15th.
Absolutely. And we'll see what happens next year. Thanks, Jeff. Take care. Go and enjoy yourself for the summer and get a bit of that sunshine. All right.
And you, Eamon, and all Millwall fans that ever hear any of this, I love you all. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Bye.